This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you advertise on LinkedIn, you can build lasting relationships with customers that often translate to high-quality leads, website traffic, and higher brand awareness. For a free $100 LinkedIn ad credit, go to linkedin.com/BeanCast. Terms and conditions apply. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Transcription services provided by transcribeme.com. Visit them on the web at transcribeme.com/BeanCast for up to 25% off. That's transcribeme.com. Episode 510, Milk Toast. Monday, August 27th, 2018. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norton. Thanks for joining us. GDPR keeps surprising analysts with its unintended results. Experts now claim that it may actually be giving Google, Facebook, and other data giants more control over privacy, while stifling innovation at smaller competitors. Is it true? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, understanding how political turmoil is killing creativity, finding reasons to keep SMS around, the value of productizing sports, plus this week's Ad Fail 5. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with an experiential and activation expert, creative director at Campfire, Mr. Nick Braccia. Nick, welcome to the program.
Hi, Bob. Happy to be here.
Now, also with us, we have the executive director of creative technology at VML and someone I've tried to get on this program for a long, long time, Mr. Craig Elimeliah. Hi, Craig.
How's it going, Bob?
It's going fantastic.
Good.
And finally, we welcome back senior director and analyst for customer experience at Gartner, Mr. Augie Ray. Augie, hi.
Hello. Thank you for asking me to join you tonight.
I know. Well, we have a lot to cover, and this panel seems completely well-suited for the topics we're going to talk about. And first up, as the reality of GDPR continues to unfurl, it becomes increasingly obvious that instead of curbing the power of big players like Google and Facebook, it's instead solidifying their hold on user data. Meanwhile, it's forcing smaller innovators out of the market, which is not good for the innovation in the industry, which should be obvious by now. So, Craig, I'm going to go to you first on this question, and hopefully you'll have something to say about it. But
Sure.
Does this analysis jibe with your own assessments of GDPR? And if so, what are the potential consequences?
I don't know if it necessarily jives 100%, at least from my perspective. I think that, with the added layers of, regulation and sort of the, everything that GDPR is sort of, implying that people have to start doing from all angles of collecting data and trying to get people to, interact with anything on the internet. I think that what it's going to force us to do is actually create better experiences, better content. I think people are going to find that, the expectation of content being sort of just free. I think the expectation of everything, at their fingertips is going to sort of fade away a little bit. I think that age of the internet and age of sort of being able to sort of expect everything to be at your fingertips. I just think it's time to start getting people to pay for it in one way or another. And I think people are going to pay for it through, having to sort of go through different gates of acceptance in terms of understanding what types of data being collected as they peruse their rabbit holes of whatever internet surfing they're doing. I think that Yeah, I'm sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say it's one of those things where you're absolutely right about the fact that we've come to expect so many things to be free, and that we have to pay in some way, whether it's giving up some privacy or giving up some kind of money. And I think that that's going to be the reality going forward. And GDPR is obviously about making sure that users are protected in that process. But Augie, can you add to this conversation a little bit about the user experience involved here? Because, what we're getting here is increasing consolidation, increasing control of the user privacy spectrum by Google, by Facebook, by the big players in the data markets. And GDPR was supposed to curb this,
Yeah.
and it doesn't seem to be doing any of that. It seems to be not protecting users' privacy, and because users don't really care enough to be concerned. All they know is all these smaller players are asking for their privacy, and they're saying no, but the big players that they use are saying they're going to say yes to, and that seems to consolidate the power of the big players.
I think there's a short-term and long-term effect that we'll have to wait to see how it plays out. In the short term, clearly the quote unquote monopolies, Google, Facebook, Amazon, do benefit from this. They get permission and access that is much greater than the small and quote unquote innovative players. But we also have to appreciate that this puts a giant target on the backs of Google, Facebook, and Amazon. As we all know, the EU fines can be up to 4% of revenue, and that could be $1.6 billion for Facebook if it is found to have broken some of the most serious of the rules at some point in the future. So I think in the short run, there might be a little bit of a shakeout, but in the long run, it just puts a great deal of responsibility on Google, Facebook, and Amazon to be documenting and to be careful and to not cross lines.
Can we stop for a second before you go on to your next point? Because this point about the fines and about these massive fines that keep being tossed around and people saying this is what they could be facing and it's all doom and gloom. Do we really believe anybody's going to pay a $1.6 billion fine? That if the EU actually comes after Google or Facebook, do we really believe that they're going to do that?
Do I think that the EU will try to assess such a fine?
They'll try. No, they'll try to assess it, but there's no way they're going to. The players are going to actually pay this fine.
Well, I mean, first of all, a fine's a fine. I mean, I can't comment on the legalities of how it might play out and what they might actually pay. But, there's a tremendous cost to Google, Facebook, and Amazon if they face a threat of a fine, regardless of whether they get hit with the 1.6 billion and pay the 1.6 billion or whatever it may be. The EU clearly has been much more activist than regulators in the U.S. have been, and they certainly have a bias toward protecting the privacy of the user. So, in the short run, what's happening, the thing that I think is interesting about this is that what is going somewhat unexplored here is what this really means is that marketers were perfectly happy to use a web of small data providers without having any idea where the data came from or whether consumers consented to it. And it took a law for them to begin to care. I mean, it just demonstrates how little marketers know about the chain of value, how things are working, where their data is coming from, and ultimately, whether in fact they give a great deal of care for the trust and privacy and respect of the customer. So I think that the GDPR is good. I think it is shining a light on the fact that many marketers were being very loose with some of their policies and some of the providers they use. In the short run, I'm not that worried about a threat to quote unquote innovation here, because the innovation typically that we're talking about has violated some consumers' rights and privacy in order to be delivered better advertising. So I think now the onus is on Google, Facebook, and Amazon to do it right, or to face, potentially really serious, not just fines, not just the legal costs, but even the reputational aspects of being caught doing something. I mean, Facebook's taken a couple of body blows. We know that users are stalling. Clearly, Facebook is getting a little concerned. The last thing it would need is a giant scandal in the EU because they've been accused of misusing people's data right now.
True. I mean, it's just like, obviously they are on their best behavior, but what about this factor of it's easy for a big player to get you to agree to give up all your privacy, yet the small players are having struggles and are just pulling out of the European Union, or pulling out of markets, or potentially even going out of business because they can't get the kind of trust that the big players enjoy. And it's not because of any kind of nefarious deeds on the smaller players, Nick, right? I mean, it's just like when innovation is being stifled just because it's usually because some big player controls all the cards and the small player can't even come and sit at the table.
Yeah, I think it's really frustrating. From the creative end, and that's an area, with GDPR, which isn't exactly in my proverbial wheelhouse. But at the same time, I tend to believe that smaller innovators are always going to emerge, and they're going to do so through transparency, earning trust, giving consumers a reason to trust, and always making sure that on that end of the equation, they see and feel like they're in a relationship with a trusted partner providing value. And
this is really interesting.
The last thing we want them to do is to look at the other end and feel like the Borg.
Nick, this is really interesting what you're saying. I mean, it's just, I think that it's the tendency of the doomsayers out there to go on and say that the reason that these small players are being forced out is because they're not being given a fair shake by the big players, and the audience just doesn't trust them. But what you bring up is a valid point. Without good creative, without good messaging, without a proper introduction that's going to gain that trust of the user, you're never going to succeed. So that's always been the innovator dilemma, right?
Yeah, although I got to say, I mean, you say that they haven't done anything wrong, and probably many of them haven't, but the reason they're being forced out is that they can't demonstrate that the data they have permission to use. If they could demonstrate it, if they had consent, they wouldn't be getting pushed out. And so your contention is that they're getting pushed out without doing anything wrong. I'm not sure that's actually true. If they had permission, they'd still have a long line of marketers marching to their door. In fact, even an even longer line now, if they demonstrably had permission. So I think that maybe this bears just a little more digging.
Fair enough. And it's just like, and as with all things, when I pull it out of a magazine and start looking at it, pulling out of the magazine, I can't remember the last time I read a magazine, but every time I pull it off a website, I mean, I take all this with a grain of salt, and your point's, well taken overall. There is the fact that if someone is not getting the permission of the user, then they may not have the right to have that data in the first place. I think that's a very valid point and something that we need to consider. But let me go back to Craig here for a second. We look at GDPR and we look at the intention, which was to control the way that Google, Facebook, the big data players were infringing and impinging upon the privacy of people in the European Union. It doesn't seem to be having that effect. Do we expect more legislation? Do we expect doubling down and enforcement on the existing legislation? What do you think is going to happen, and what does the environment look like in 5-10 years?
I think the big players are gonna realize that they're gonna have to play to play. They're gonna have to pay to play. I think they're gonna sort of step up to the table and start, I think, helping these legislators actually understand, how to better create these laws and these guardrails. I think that, there's no one better poised than these guys to sit down at the table and start getting them to understand, where the data is coming from, how the data is being used, because I don't think the legislators themselves fully understand. And I think that, what we're going to see is somewhat of a experience, sort of renaissance where, a lot of these smaller players that you're talking about that are being pushed out are going to be replaced by people who are natively trained in being able to start transparent businesses and understanding how to, be transparent with their users and create interfaces that are fully transparent. And I think we're going to start seeing new paradigms, and the big guys, I think the big guys will probably look at a lot of these smaller players as acquisition targets in order to start infusing some of that culture into their companies and being able to find the talent that are able to sort of natively or more fluidly kind of navigate these waters. Because I think, like many of us, when the internet first started, no one really knew what the hell was going on. And now we're all sitting on a podcast talking about the next phase of, what nobody kind of, knows what might transpire. So I think that these guys are going to kind of wait it out for a little bit, probably cozy up as much as they possibly can, and try to be sort of the test bed for a lot of this stuff. And then I think that, if they buy their time long enough, there's going to be plenty of kids coming up with some really good ideas that will essentially, sort of safeguard their companies from the next wave of technology infrastructure and compliance.
Nick, what's your take on this whole situation? How would you sum it up? Is it a matter of the fact that the existing legislation is not working? Is it a matter of the existing legislation is effective and it's going to continue to be effective? Or is it that there's no possibility of actually legislating this collection of data in any kind of effective way that's going to protect user privacy, and we just need to do our best to shore up the gaps, make sure that people are playing honestly with their requests for this data, but the whole idea of privacy needs to go out the window? What would you say?
I think there's going to be a scramble and adaptation. I mean, my what I recall is when I was working on a kid's candy brand when COPA hit, and the way that we all had to really move very, very quickly, and it meant that everything was going to get undone and it was going to change all the rules. But we all adapted and it moved on, and we just kind of sorted out and trudged the path forward. I think the same thing is going to happen here. What I'm curious to see is what sort of legislation hits nationally as opposed to overseas. And
you mean in the U.S.?
What the fallout is there? I mean, obviously, European legislation has impact on plenty of U.S.-based companies, but I'm curious to see if anything hits in the States.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And it's just, as we've proven over and over again, legislation in the States is even less effective than what it's been in the European Union. So it'll be an interesting time to keep ahead of. Well, I'm going to talk next about the advertising in a politically charged climate and how it could possibly be making creative just vanilla and plain and awful. It's an interesting thought. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But first, I got to talk about our sponsor, LinkedIn, and your chance to get $100 free ad credit. So there's a real reason to listen to this one, guys. First of all, let's talk about LinkedIn. LinkedIn is good for some things and it's terrible for other things. It's absolutely terrible as a dating site. If you're using LinkedIn as a dating site, forget about it. You should stop that activity right now. Not a good idea. But when you're trying to actually target your customers, when you're trying to target customers where they're engaging every single day and where they're ready to actually make a decision to buy a product, LinkedIn is perfect. They're great for that. They're one of the best places to put your ad campaign. And when you advertise on LinkedIn, which is hands down the world's largest professional network, you're going to have the opportunity to build the kind of long-term relationships with your customers that translate into high-quality leads, translate into website traffic, and of course, translate into higher brand awareness. Now, what's the first step? What do you do first? Well, you want to talk to the right audience. You want to find the people who matter most to you when you're trying to get a campaign out in the market. And every day, over 500 million professionals engage with content on LinkedIn, and chances are your future customers are among them. Now, LinkedIn has the kind of marketing tools that will help you target your customers with the kind of precision that you expect from any kind of online advertising program, but they do it with a neat little twist because they're dealing with professional contacts and professional information. So you can target right down to the job title, down to the company name, down to the industry. And because better targeting equals a message that your customers care about, which it'll turn into a trust building exercise where you're going to build trust with your customers by giving them messaging that is absolutely targeted to the stuff that they care about most. And here's a stat that I'm going to throw out for you, and I want you to pay attention to this one, because 4 out of 5 customers who are on LinkedIn are decision makers at their companies. Now let's say that again. 4 out of 5 customers who are on LinkedIn every day, looking at the content, looking at the advertising, they are decision makers at their companies. So you're building relationships with the people who really matter to your business. Now, I promised you a $100 LinkedIn ad credit, and here it is. To redeem your free $100 LinkedIn ad credit and launch your first campaign, you go to linkedin.com/BeanCast. That address again, linkedin.com/BeanCast. And they're going to give you a free $100 ad credit. Terms and conditions apply. So remember, LinkedIn, terrible for dating, but absolutely the best place to target your next ad campaign. And we thank them very much for their support of our show. Well, some brands have definitely gotten political over the last year. There's been a noticeable reticence, though, to offend in ads since President Trump took office, however, which has, according to Adweek, resulted in uninspiring work across the spectrum. I'm not sure I completely agree with this, Nick, but this article tried to lay this all at the feet of political polarization. Is this the problem? Is the problem taking the edge out of ads? Is this polarization? Is this political polarization? Is this the problem that's taking the edge out of ads, or is it a sign of a bigger problem? After that lovely tee-up that was absolutely flawed in so many ways, please take it from me and let's hear it from you.
It was great. It was a great tee-up. So I read this piece and thought there's absolutely some false attribution. That's not to say that there isn't some impact. And the thing that I thought was most accurate about it was Laura Feglia, ECD at Cole McVoy, talked about all the recent work coming out being, quote, mild salsa. And I like the term milquetoast a lot, but I don't think the political climate is 100% responsible. And in thinking about that and really loving that term milquetoast, I looked into its etymology and saw that it came from a comic strip character named Casper Milquetoast, who was described by his creator as, quote, the man who speaks softly and gets hit with a big stick. And I love that, because I think agencies, especially holding company agencies, some of which I've worked for, are getting hit or about to get hit with this big stick. And I think there's at least 3 big reasons that have nothing to do, with the current man occupying, Pennsylvania Ave. So the first of those, and I'll be quick on this one because I think you guys actually touched on it last week on your show, which is industry brain drain. I think as far as creative minds and the notion of the best and brightest, that they're not coming to ads. They want to be indie creators, go to product-centric startups, become engineers, or go to, to Google, Facebook, Netflix, yada, yada. So just by nature, I don't think we're getting the cream of the crop because our space isn't as sexy a draw as it was in 99, around when I started, or in 2009 when social jobs really broke. I think that's,
I've heard that complaint for a number of years, and I've even participated in that complaint on occasion. That somehow the best and the brightest are not being sought after or not seeking the ad industry as a career. But I can't see how that how that's the truth, and that's why creativity is floundering at agencies. Because I also know, being a fairly creative guy, how tough the pressure is on a creative in this business to keep the client happy. And if your client doesn't want to take risks, there's no way in hell that you're going to convince your client to take that risk. I mean, maybe once in a blue moon you get a client who's willing to actually push the envelope and do something super interesting. But it seems like the general climate is what drives the lack of creativity in advertising. I've met so many young creatives who are absolutely inspiring in the way that they think and the way that they bring up ideas, and yet they're not able to bring these ideas to life or fruition in a campaign because they're not allowed to. So I don't believe that first comment that somehow the best and brightest are not being attracted to advertising is actually valid. Wouldn't you say?
I mean, well, the good news is that what you just started to describe is my reason number 2. So
Oh my
I mean,
gosh.
I've had a slightly different experience with the youths that with the up and comers that I interview, but I certainly agree with everything that you said about what's going on and how it, I think, has much more to do with the agency client relationship, but also how people think about culture. One of the things that I got to thinking about was that mass shared culture, the idea of everyone watching the Cheers finale or the MASH finale or everybody talking about an Alka-Seltzer commercial, that's been dying for a long, long time, and that predates Trump. And I feel like agencies, particularly with big, broad mass market creative pieces, have struggled as we've split into these diffuse subcultures. It used to be that you could work on the fringes of mass culture and everyone would still get the joke, or if not, the person next to them could clue them in. But the system of references are so split between what I look at as subcultures now. So it's really hard to resonate across divides. And because agencies, clients chasing ROI, kind of being fearful, want to land as broadly as they can, that's how we're getting this milquetoast work, or work that's devoid of point of view, political or otherwise. And I thought of something that I heard when I was doing some work in the gaming industry, and the term was used for approving the art, for approving art style, to make sure that games were going to be massively successful across the globe, particularly free-to-play games. And that term was the least objectionable. They would look for creative. This is a real thing. They would look for creative, not that was the best or the most interesting or the most polarizing or daring, but like, we got it, guys. We found the least objectionable, and they would test to achieve that.
So
and I understand why it works in that world, but I really feel that that's in agents, with the work that agencies are finally presenting to clients, or that maybe scared clients are willing to buy, ends up being the least objectionable.
Let me go deeper on that one first, because it's this, there's two ways to look at this. I think that it's clear that we can't blame Trump for this. I mean, I think that that's just a silly.
Oh, I can blame Trump for anything.
No. This is
This
is a silly headline, and it was meant to get clicks, so we can throw that out the window. But this idea that we look for the least objectionable, is that partially because of the ongoing, the increasingly divided populace in the United States, globally? Is it the political polarization that's been slowly brewing that has led to our current predicament?
There are plenty of ways of being creative and being interesting and telling a story that don't have to probe into the political polarization.
Absolutely.
I do think this is. I joke because you know that I wear my politics pretty transparently.
No, Augie,
Yeah,
you are politically motivated. I would never have suspected
I'm
that.
so subtle, but for as much as I can blame Trump for a lot, I'm not going to blame Trump or political polarization for bad creative. And I don't know if it's the least objectionable or it's just the decision making by committee that strips out anything that could be the least bit offensive. And here I'm not just talking about, politically offensive. Maybe it's that we're all too sensitive. I still don't think that's it. I think some brands can still break through and tell a great story. What I think is that the industry isn't being given an opportunity to succeed in many respects by clients that have turned very conservative. And again, I don't mean politically. I have to always watch my language as I'm talking about this, because it always sounds like I'm coming back to it. But I just think that, a lot of bad decisions are being made. And I don't think that we can blame politics for the fact that cookies and tires and cars can't do a better job of being sold.
Craig, here we've been taking this from this angle all through this conversation, that somehow the article is right and that creativity is bad and that everything's milquetoast and that there's all kinds of problems. The first thing that struck me when I read this article was creativity isn't all that bad. I mean, there's just as many bad ads today as there were 20 years ago, and vice versa. It seems like there's just as many good ads. It seems to me creativity and interesting work is a rarity, and it's always been a rarity. It's just more in our face how much bad advertising there is because there's so much more of it.
Exactly. I think there's not only there's so much more of it, but I think also the sort of the there's so many people out there today. I mean, I don't know if we've ever seen the amount of content that's being created at mass. And I think that, you have so much content being created at such a high fidelity, and people are creating really, really, really good content that's very authentic, that's true to the people who are watching it, that serves every single niche out there. And I think that, creatives inside of agencies having to compete with that, I think it's really difficult. I don't think there's ever been a time where, as a professional creative, you've had so much amateur content to compete with. And I think, clients very oftentimes will find a piece of content online created by, some kid in his basement and say, this is the kind of stuff we're looking to do. And, you're sort of beholden to the type of stuff that's out there that's sort of, turning people's heads and getting people's attention. And that becomes this, sort of the benchmark. And, you have creative directors that can't, you can't direct that type of stuff. That's the type of stuff that's just coming out of culture. And I think culture today is so infused with everything that, with all this content that's being created. I think we're just dizzy. I think that creatives within agencies, like there's no sort of North Star. There's nothing to kind of like point you in the right direction. There's just so much everywhere that you're competing with on a daily basis at a clip that is just absolutely blinding. It's paralyzed. It's almost paralyzing. I can tell you personally, just like looking at my teams in house and across the board, across the network, it's just like seeing what these kids have to compete with. I mean, I personally, I don't know that there's ever been a time that you have so much going on, and trying to break through that noise is almost impossible. So, the level of creativity, I agree with you, Bob. The level of creativity hasn't died down. I go to Cannes every year. I see the best work. I think it's still up there. I think it's really good. But again, what you're comparing it to and what's out there, there's just so much good content. It's just really hard to break through.
You may be right, and it hasn't been any different. But I would just ask the people listening, they're all marketing professionals, to think of their favorite ad campaigns of all time. The things that really stood out. Volkswagen, Think Small. Coca-Cola, Want to Teach the World to Sing. I'm just thinking of things off the top of my head. Absolute Vodka and all of their really striking ads. Miller Lite, Tastes Great, Less Filling. Now, one of those that I mentioned was created in the last 30 years.
Yeah,
so
but wait a minute, Augie. That's like the focus group of one, and you happen to be as old as I am.
That's why I'm asking people on the call to bring up their favorite ad campaigns. Can you bring up anything that you think in the last 15 years? Now, this could be, the internet, the fractionalization of channels, all sorts of things that can contribute to this. I'm not laying blame here, but can you name anything in the last 15 years that you would think stand head and shoulders with the things I just mentioned?
Yeah, there's a couple of campaigns. I think PlayStation has always been doing a fantastic job, and I love the VP of Everything campaign. That was wonderful work. I think that the Henry V speech that they did.
Who was the VP of Everything campaign for? Because I can't recall.
For PlayStation. It was for the PlayStation 2. He was the VP of Everything. It was a brilliant campaign because it talked not just about the gaming system. It talked about how it was also able to do everything, connect you online, connect you to Blu-ray player, connect you to, I mean, it really was a well thought out and well executed campaign that was entertaining and extremely well targeted to its audience. And it came out in the last decade.
Right.
There are good spots. I mean, there was one I loved, I guess in the last 15 years, for Emerald Nuts, that I thought was terrific. And I still like Geico stuff. But what's telling to me is, of the big spots this year, how many of them are just dance choreography? Because I feel like that's the only thing that can go really broad. There was the Shy at Apple iHome piece. There's a big Bacardi piece. I feel like there's at least half a dozen just popular song and people dancing to it, saying nothing objectionable spots. And I feel like that's when, in this article, this piece was very TV centric. I do believe there's lots of great creative going on all over the place. I do think that TV in particular has been pretty flat because it's trying to be broad.
And I think that goes back to, what I mentioned last week. I mean, we need to stop thinking about advertising as being a television spot or a spot of any kind and think of it more like an ad-like object. The
That's
ad
right.
lob is,
That's
as Colin Glom always tells me, this ad lob, this ad-like object can be anything. And I think that you, of all people, Nick, are a great example of how you think about advertising, you think about promotions and marketing as being something that has never been seen before, as opposed to just using the same old medias in the same old tired mix to get across a message. And I think that's...
Yeah, and this might sound selfish and ridiculous, but to go with some of Augie's references, I thought of when I was reading this article, the Ricky Nelson song "Garden Party." After he got booed out of Madison Square Garden for not playing, I think it was MSG, for not playing his hits, and he said he wrote the song "Garden Party" with a chorus when you can't please everyone, so you've got to please yourself. And I just feel like focusing on what your insight is, what you do, and not worrying so much about checking every box is something that I really think that clients and account departments need to do, and that's more than creatives. But I do believe that creatives get pressured to check those boxes, and everything they can do to resist that, they should.
Well, we got to move on to our next topic of the evening. The Doomsday Patrol is targeting SMS now. With the rise of IP messaging, SMS seems to be all but forgotten, and a lot of people are writing it off finally. And yet, Augie, SMS remains a critical tool for marketers. I personally get lots of opted-in messages on a regular basis. So should we evolve past the granddaddy of mobile messaging, or is it still essential to user experience? What's your take on it?
Yeah, well, I think SMS is dead like email is dead, and as in quite alive, thank you, and doing really well. So my peer at Gartner, Charlie Govan, has a report that he produced last year that I think is worth mentioning. He had some research in it that found that SMS is one of the top 5 most adopted mobile marketing tactics, but 60% of mobile marketers that we surveyed don't use it, and 1/3 of those have no plans to invest in it in the coming 12 months. And so Charlie's take, and one that I agree with, is that SMS is not dead yet. Now, all that being equal, we have to recognize the rise of IP messaging, internet protocol messaging, the WhatsApp and the messengers of the world. They offer much richer interactivity. They offer user controls that are greater. And so this is clearly going to continue to grow, and it's going to eat away, I think, at SMS. But SMS is going to be alive years from now. I'm a customer experience, a CX guy, as you know, and at the end of the day, the thing that I'd say to any client is understand your market, understand your audience. What are they using? What do they want? And I think that a lot of marketers still have a lot of people who use SMS, and there's a lot of value there. And the last thing I'll say really quickly is just that whether you're doing an IP messaging or SMS, the fact of the matter is that you have to have an integrated sort of messaging strategy around your campaigns, around your interactions, and whether it's an SMS or whether it's in WhatsApp or Messenger, you need to be able to execute it in the way that your customers want. So I people love to talk about, you talked about this being the doomsayers. I agree. People love to say things are dead. SMS is not dead. It's not going to be dead for years, but it's just not going to look as sexy as it did a few years ago.
Agreed on all points. I have no comment, but I do want to point out and move on to Craig here for his commentary on this. SMS continues to be the one system that is universally accepted and adopted everywhere, meaning every single phone out there has SMS on it. Not every phone has, Facebook Messenger, despite the fact that it has such huge penetration. Not every phone has WhatsApp. Not every phone has all the many Google messaging systems that keep failing. So, when you look at that, is SMS going to be something that's a critical function, or is it always just going to exist as kind of an underpinning of communication that helps to drive functionality across devices when you need it the most? What's your take on that? Is it less about being the future of messaging and more about just being the underpinnings to make sure that you can get alerts out to every individual out there? I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, I think, I like the way you sort of framed it as kind of the underpinning, but I think, culture tends to surprise us. I think when you look at sort of the native aspect of it, just like you said, it's on every device. It is tried and true. It's trusted, so on and so forth. That's sort of when we get surprised and somebody does something with it that kind of like completely turns the whole thing on its head and kind of gets us to look at it from a completely different perspective. And just like you see different audio formats starting to come back into play, and people are appreciating sort of the sound quality and just the nature of the tactile sort of experience around different older audio formats. I think that SMS in the same way might have that sort of charming addition to the sort of the customer experience continuum, right? So I think I think Augie said it really well. If it's done the right way, if it's done in a really unexpected way that kind of, I hate to use the term, but you sort of surprise and delight, or you sort of provide a lot of value in sort of a little packet, I think people will appreciate the channel for what it is. I think it's just a matter of like how is it going to evolve within its role on our smartphones? I think that as people adopt WhatsApp, as people adopt Facebook Messenger, so on and so forth, all of these different apps become more robust. They might become much more cluttered, and we might want just something really simple and really easy and something super straightforward. And one of these non-creative creatives in one of these agencies might actually get creative and do something super interesting with the channel, and then all of a sudden it becomes something that we didn't really expect. So I think it's not going to go away. I think it's going to hang around. It is tried and true. I hope someone does something really interesting with it. I hope that as we become more masters of connecting experiences and being able to weave things and orchestrate experiences from a customer perspective in ways that are really nice and fluid and complement one another. I hope SMS plays a big role in that, and I hope it finds its place, along that continuum. But right now, I think it is what it is. I think it does what it needs to do. But who knows? It might.
I sometimes think that people think way too linearly when they're thinking about SMS, and they're thinking about it in terms of it's a messaging system, so we need to send messages to our customers. And I think that that's the trip up, Nick, right? Because it's just like there's so many opportunities. Like I'm working with a startup right now that will take your phone number on a web page and then text you a one-time code, which will then populate all the information on this web page, so you don't have to figure it out. You don't have to spend pages and pages and pages filling in all this information. I mean, it's tremendously useful. It's definitely part of the marketing funnel, and yet it's not an outbound message. It's just a functionality that improves the ability for anybody doing registration online to actually complete the registration, as opposed to being frustrated and abandoning it. And I think that's the kind of thing that SMS is tremendous at providing. I mean, it can improve the user experience universally across the spectrum. It doesn't have to be about outbound messaging, right?
No, I absolutely agree. I know, people always chase the hot new thing, and there's lots of IP messaging tools, but people are extremely promiscuous with their apps. And what they're not promiscuous with is their phone number. You want to hold on to your phone number forever, which is why I think that SMS is the foundation. I think the way that Augie described the dynamic earlier was right on. And I think that again, it's going to come to creativity of application, but I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah, the last thing I want to point out, the ubiquity is one thing, but we started tonight talking about permission, right? And getting permission, and ultimately, whatever you do with SMS or any of the IP tools, IP messaging tools, you still need permission. And I think it's going to be up to the the brands to get that permission, and then consumers are going to choose whichever messaging app they want. And so I don't think it's a matter of that SMS is going to live or die. Just like I don't think it's that WhatsApp or Messenger is going to live or die. I just think that we need unified strategies around messaging that allow people to select their favorite and preferred tool. And, whether or not WhatsApp or Messenger is as ubiquitous as SMS isn't really the question here. It's going to be up to what your customer really wants.
Amen. Amen to that. Well, our last topic, real quick, we're running out of time. So now pay-per-view golf is apparently a thing. A head-to-head battle between Tiger Woods and Phil Mickelson has become the latest way golf marketers can make money, but it follows a trend of creating more and more value out of a core sports product across all sports. Craig, this is obviously great for sponsorship for the short run, but is there a ceiling? Is there really endless opportunity for people to productize their sporting events and sell pay-per-views and do head-to-head matches and all kinds of things that are not part of the typical sports fare? Or is there a ceiling where there just gets to be too much of this going on and it all starts to fall apart?
I don't know. I don't know if there's necessarily a ceiling right now. I think you look at basketball. I'm a huge basketball fan. I go to a lot of non-NBA events in Manhattan at various parks, and a lot of one-to-one matchups with professional athletes versus amateur athletes, so on and so forth. I don't know that there's necessarily a ceiling. I think if you look at what's going on with esports right now, for example, I mean, you could potentially, have these events where, LeBron James versus Magic Johnson as an esport, one-on-one type of matchup where people will fill, Madison Square Garden to watch two, phenomenal esport players go up head-to-head one against one another using the sort of, the avatars of your favorite athletes. I think that if you look at where esports is going and you kind of look at the trajectory of that particular field, I think that kind of gives us a nod as to what the potentiality here is. And I think that, I think Major League Sports is really starting to come to terms with the fact that esports is, or forget esports, but something is nipping at its heels and something is sort of threatening to kind of take away the share of, and kind of dethrone them as kind of the big spectator, monarchs. And, I think that sports today really has to go in the way of this sort of entertainment. Wrestling has been, I'm not a huge expert on wrestling, but I think I know enough about it to know sort of how it works. And I think they've been doing it for years. And I think once you start moving out of that kind of demographic and you start moving into things like golf and seeing Tiger go head to head with Phil and or LeBron and Kobe having a one-on-one street match, people are going to pay for this, and and when you have so many channels competing for content, so you have Amazon, you have Netflix, you have Facebook, you have Twitch, all of these channels are looking for content, and they're going to be producing this type of content or buying this type of content from people who are producing it, and as long as their appetites are as they are, and they seem to only be getting more and more voracious, I think we're going to see that more and more of these types of events. So right now, I don't think there's a ceiling. I think it's just going to explode, and I'd be really interested in seeing sort of how the dust settles.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Craig said. I mean, I just want to state that this all started about a year ago. I think the potential for it with McGregor versus Merriweather, with a crossfight. A UFC star against the greatest living boxer, 6.7 million buys globally at about $80 a pop. So I think at that point, everyone started to salivate. The sports core have been monetized, but the massive casual who want to see these fantasy matchups at almost at an exhibition level, that's a massive audience. I won't be surprised if Danica Patrick's racing Dale Jr. late in 12 months to retire. I'm not kidding. And Bleacher Report Live getting into this versus the Bleacher Report, their audience, golf and upmarket sport. But then I'm thinking disposable income, not a bad bet to get on the map and tested out having Tiger versus Phil for 9 million bananas.
Wow, wow. Well, great talking to you guys, but it's time for the AdFell 5. Before we get to that segment of the show, though, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Nick Braccia. You can find him at campfirenyc.com. That's the home of Campfire, the agency that is the best at doing experiential marketing that I've ever run across. One of the most amazing shops. So, Nick, what's going on in your world? What would you like to promote?
Well, thank you very much. You can check us out, everyone, at campfirenyc.com. We have some work debuting next week as part of our ongoing program for USA Network's The Purge. This is an on-air continuation of the program that we ran at San Diego Comic-Con. So take a look at purgeshoppingchannel.com and tune in for a 15-minute Purge Shopping Channel infomercial September 1st at 10:45 p.m. on Sci-Fi.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I love what you guys did in San Diego
Thank
for
you.
The Purge. Very, very cool stuff. Now, next up, we have Craig Elimeliah. I almost tripped up on that again. So Craig Elimeliah, you can find him at vml.com. That is the home of one of the most effective and powerful and largest digital agencies out there, doing some truly amazing work. So tell us what's going on in your world. What would you like to promote, Craig?
What isn't going on in our world? I think promotion-wise, we actually just launched a really interesting piece of work for the United Nations just last week. We've partnered with the United Nations over the past few years in launching one of their biggest efforts for the year around World Humanitarian Day. And this year we really went sort of head on with some of the bureaucracy that goes on at the UN, which is primarily centered around the concept of a petition. And we wanted to challenge the concept of the petition this year, and we believed young people found petitions to be effective, non-effective, and not very relevant. So we completely reinvented the idea of the petition for the UN in a really cool, interesting way. You could check it out at worldhumanitarianday.org, where we're allowing people to sign a petition with a selfie. And then that selfie gets ported to a living petitions piece of artwork, a statue that's in the UN right now. It can be seen at the entrance of the General Assembly. Some really cool work, some really interesting thinking there. Our team in VML New York just did an absolutely phenomenal job. Definitely worth checking out.
That sounds great. So yeah, if you have an opportunity, definitely go and check that out. And last but not least, Augie Ray, blogging away at Gartner.com. He's the head of customer experience. So doing a bang-up job and always coming up with the latest trends and issues in that particular sector. So tell us what's going on in your world, Augie. What would you like to promote?
Yeah, I have to say, for me, nothing special to promote here. Just more of the same. We're doing good work for our clients. Gartner in the last year merged with L2, the research firm in New York, and Corporate Executive Board, and we're getting a lot of synergy out of that. So if some of your listeners happen to be interested in research and advisory services, I just ask them to check out Gartner.com or reach out to me, and I'll get you connected to the right people.
Sounds good. And as for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. You can find out how to advertise on the show as well. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And don't forget, if you want transcription services and you would like a transcription of this show, go to transcribeme.com/beancast. They are providing listeners with a special discount for your first-time transcription. And they're providing transcriptions on our website, so if you want to get the transcription of this show, you'll get it within a week over at thebeancast.com. So check it all out at transcribeme.com/beancast. And now it's time for the AdFell 5, a rundown of the lowest moments in marketing, advertising, and public relations from the last week. And first up, this is just an ad fail because it used advertising. It's not necessarily a bad on the advertising industry per se, but soccer star Tomas Repka wanted to really stick it to his ex-wife. So he took out an ad offering her up for escort services. Big laughs until Repka begins a 6-month jail sentence. Oh, man. Nick, what's going on here?
All I have to say is red card on the play.
Now, next up, Verizon has that nasty habit of throttling bandwidth once you exceed your limit. It's just a fact. Got to accept it. Except they probably should have checked who they were doing it to, Craig, since reports surfaced that they were massively throttling first responders in the California wildfires and in Hawaii during the hurricane. This is like a nightmare when it comes to public relations disaster.
Major nightmare. I think we're going to see some of these folks getting some special, unlimited plans that us customers will lust after. But this is a big PR nightmare.
Now, next up, Sony is denying reports that in court they were forced to admit that the posthumously released Michael Jackson album they put out had 3 songs, Augie, featuring other singers who kinda sounded like Michael Jackson, but not. I
think Sony's got to look at the man in the mirror because this is really bad, and they've got to.
Yeah.
Okay, good reference. Next up, the Laurie Award winning, that's the big South African ad award, Trump versus Verwoerd, I can't even say the word, but I'll try, Verwoerd, apartheid museum radio ad apparently went overboard trying to compare comments of the U.S. president to the former apartheid leader. Instead of using the plethora of actual damaging quotes from each man, Nick, the agency instead chose quotes from each that are largely dismissed by journalists as being fictitious. I'm like, well, you don't even have to try. You could have taken quotes from either of these guys and had a perfectly legitimate spot. Instead, you choose 2 quotes that are unsubstantiated.
Yeah, that supports my position to assume everything I hear and see is fake news until I do my own due diligence, even if it supports my belief. This one was so ridiculous.
Yeah.
And finally, this isn't necessarily an ad fail, Augie. If anything, it's more of a mail fail, but I love this story nonetheless. A woman on Tinder actually convinced a potential suitor who wanted to give her his number that, oh my God, she had the same number as he did. And the text exchange that she tweeted out had 175,000 likes as people looked at this conversation as she convinced this guy that he actually had the same number as her.
I think this relates to the earlier comment about fake news, and this is why fake news works.
The thing that really struck me about this is, would it be funny if a guy did it to a woman? And I was like, nope. I do not support this Tinder joke.
Well, have something to add to this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag AdFail5. That's pound, AdFail, and the number 5. Well, that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an iTunes listener, we've also provided a direct link to the iTunes Music Store, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory of iTunes. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Actually, we'll be back again in 2 weeks because we're going to be off for the Labor Day weekend. And we hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. It's just like, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly.
Cool beans.